Since the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1919, the Middle East has become one of the most politically unstable regions in the world. Combine poorly drawn borders, ethnic diversity, religious diversity, and colossal oil reserves, and you have all the ingredients for instability. The Middle East has already seen plenty of trouble over the last 100 years, but the next decade will be particularly critical, as the US and Russia, two of the main players in the region, are already engaged in a highly expensive conflict in Ukraine, which has no near end in sight. This has accelerated the changing power balance in the world, with the Middle East not being an exception. Though there are several active wars in the region, the essential conflict is between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the US. Iran is on a quest to unite the Islamic world and become the main power in the Middle East. In 2023, they initiated a wider proxy conflict with US assets in the region. In this video, we will lay out the existing geopolitical state of the Middle East, then use it to predict what will happen in 2024. To stay concise, I'll avoid discussing historical context where possible in this video, as otherwise the duration will be several hours long. There are many great videos out there on this already. The main conflict in the Middle East at this time is the ongoing chess match between Iran and the US. American allies and adversaries in the Middle East have fluctuated over the decades, but this rivalry is now more set in stone than ever, with Iran simultaneously doubling down by arming Russia, the main US adversary in Europe. Iran is the Islamic Republic. The regime can be described as having two main goals. First is to support the Shiite community, a smaller sect of Islam that are a minority in the Middle East. The regime will always prioritise defending Shiite communities where necessary. The second goal is to support Islam as a whole, and unite the Islamic people across the entire Middle East, Sunnis included. This goal is obviously far more challenging. Over the coming chapters we will discuss where Iran is involved all over the Middle East and how they are faring in this challenge. There are multiple causes for the emergence of such a regime in Iran, but the simple explanation is Iran's demographics. Iran has major ethnic diversity, with large Azeri, Kurdish and Baloch populations, as well as religious diversity, with Sunnis taking up around 10% of the population. Inevitably, over the years, this has led to endless instability within Iran. To unify so many people, the ruling regime uses Islam as its fundamental identity. This isn't even mentioning disputes and incursions from its neighbours. Iran's setup of alliances is complex, but generally its strongest allies are the Shia communities across the Middle East, such as in western Yemen and southern Lebanon. Some of these communities are already in active conflict with the Sunnis in the region. The Sunnis are usually supported by wealthy Arab states such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who are often described as major adversaries to Iran. This is not necessarily the case, however, because as we shall see, the rich Arab states are gradually going their own way, which may lead to peace for Iran. Nevertheless, Iran wants to avoid Sunni-Shia conflicts if possible. It knows that outside influence is the greater threat to the sovereignty of the Islamic people. The main such influencer at this time is of course the United States, who have military bases all over the Middle East. There are two main incentives for the US to get involved in the Middle East. First is for control of the massive oil reserves in the region, which if in the wrong hands could seriously damage the power balance in the world. The second is geography. The Suez Canal and the Red Sea are part of an essential maritime trade route between Europe and Asia. It has been essential for the dominant world powers to retain some kind of foothold here over the decades, whether it be the Ottomans, the British or the US today. With endless ethnic and religious tensions, it has not been difficult for the US to find allies and build a foothold in the region. Over recent decades, it has built a stable network of economic alliances and military footholds. The US also has Israel, who is effectively the 51st state of the US. This nation, populated by Jewish settlers, antagonises everything Iran stands for. In 2024, and for many years to come, the US-Iran conflict will change the Middle East forever. Israel, despite its size, is one of the most powerful nations in the world. Since Jewish settlers moved to the region decades ago, they have been in constant conflict with the Arab Muslims living in the area. As of 2024, Jews are fully present in the modern-day borders of Israel, excluding two areas, the Gaza Strip and parts of the West Bank. The Gaza Strip is populated with around 3 million Arab Muslims and Christians. It is a giant, densely populated metropolis of high-rise apartments. On October 7, 2023, Hamas, the main Palestinian militia, funded and supported by Iran, initiated a new stage in its conflict with Israel. On the Jewish holidays of Simchat Torah and Shemini Atzeret, paratroopers breached the border with Israel, began storming nearby Israeli settlements and capturing civilians. Why did they do this? Firstly, both sides understood that conflict between them was inevitable at some point. Israel is quickly growing in population and military strength. Sooner or later, Israel would have found an excuse for a major intervention into Gaza anyway. Secondly, the main Israeli allies were distracted dealing with Russia and Ukraine, which cost massive economic and military support. The invasion from Gaza had two military purposes. First is to catch the Israelis off guard and hurt them where possible. Second is to capture civilians to prevent Israel decimating Gaza into the Stone Age. Overall, one can describe the initial incursion as successful, as it appeared that the Israeli army were caught off guard, and many hostages were taken. The final motivation for the incursion is to gain allies. Over recent years, neighbouring Arab states such as Egypt, Jordan and the Saudis have increasingly made amends with the US and gone their own way. In fact, right before the attack, Israel and Saudi Arabia were finalising agreements on the normalisation of relations. This has left the Gazan people in an extremely challenging position. The only true chance they have at long-term survival is to get the rest of the Muslims in the Middle East on their side, and deal a crushing blow to Israel. It's no surprise that Iran became an ally to Gaza. The following Israeli incursion was inevitably going to be brutal. As Gaza is a metropolis, Hamas would rely on guerrilla warfare to survive. To supplement this, they built endless tunnels beneath Gaza to create more of a headache for the Israelis. The Israelis since have carpet-bombed Gaza. It is no surprise that there are colossal civilian and Hamas casualties in this conflict. From a military perspective, the Israelis do have some justification for their actions. Nevertheless, to any observer of the conflict, it is hard to justify the conditions in the region. Despite the immense human sacrifice of Palestinians, their situation has broadcasted clearly the brutality of the Israeli regime and their disrespect towards non-Jewish people in the Middle East. Hamas knew this would happen. This is to win the hearts of the Muslim people in the Middle East and beyond. This is essential for the future and will create a sour taste in any regime that are friendly to Israel and in turn the US. The Israeli incursion into Gaza appears to have mostly gone to plan. They have moved continuously throughout the Strip, storming Gaza City and Khan Yunis successfully. Only one major stronghold remains in Rafah, next to the Egyptian border. Of course, there are losses, but there is no indication that they are abnormally high. Israel describes itself as a casualty-phobic army and avoids high-loss military tactics. However, it's hard to define what a victory for Israel even is here. The liquidation of Hamas is the key, but as the survivors of the 3 million-strong population of Gaza, another military resistance is inevitable in the future. The bigger question is what will happen to the territory after Israel concludes its operation, which is likely to occur in 2024. My prediction is a similar situation as is currently present in the West Bank. For political purposes, Israel will allow for Palestinian settlements to remain, as long as demilitarized. However, it will keep some parts of the Gaza Strip under direct control. From here, it will slowly buy up the remaining Palestinian areas in the region, who will have no choice but to vacate the area. Israel may even reject the two-state solution entirely, but this will lead to international outrage, and Israel's allies won't be too happy, as it will likely lead to further conflict and escalation. Even if the Gaza operation is concluded, Israel and the US still have other foes to deal with, such as Hezbollah and the Houthis. The US particularly wants to settle the troubled waters as soon as possible. Before continuing, we shall discuss Israel further. As with all conflicts in the history of the world, the moral reality is grey. In this video, we will discuss the situation from a logical perspective. Israel will always be allied with the US, who have the military infrastructure to protect Israel. Israel in turn ensures a reliable foothold for the US in the Red Sea and near the Suez Canal. Israel is expanding. Israel has a fertility rate of around 3, and is a highly developed nation. It is also located in the most fertile region of the Middle East. With endless military aid from the US, it exists in a truly unstoppable configuration. Since its creation, it is no surprise that Israel has gone from strength to strength. Meanwhile, their Muslim neighbours have fertility rates trending downwards, and are on the whole very poor. Via alliances and division, the US and Israel have worked together to slowly break the Arab-Muslim resistance in the region, with former adversaries Jordan and Egypt turning a blind eye. Israel's expansion has the potential to be limitless. Over the coming century, Israel plans to continually expand via economic influence and military actions. Nevertheless, the Israeli strategy relies on a strong US presence in the region. If the US loses its foothold in the area, Israel may stand to lose everything. Right now, Israel is still dwarfed by its neighbours in the Middle East. So if they were to unite and move against Israel, especially while the US is distracted elsewhere, everything they've worked for over the last 80 years could be destroyed. What we have just described is Hamas and Iran's ideal scenario. So, expect a decisive defeat of Hamas this year. Expect the Israelis to take over the Strip in some form, likely in some compromise with the Palestinians. The region will be demilitarized and likely partitioned into Israeli and demilitarized Palestinian provinces, the latter of which Israel will eventually buy up, as is happening in the West Bank. However, to be clear, Hamas is only the beginning of a string of monumental challenges for Israel. Hamas was not Iran's only trump card in the region. It has set up other alliances that can hurt Israel and the US in different ways, that could be far more difficult to deal with. Hezbollah are a majority Shia Muslim militia in the south of the very poor Lebanon, on the border with Israel. They are funded and supported militarily by Iran. Hezbollah has begun their own operation on the northern border with Israel. There is no ground operation here, just endless artillery drills, drone battles and rocket strikes. The military logic of this is to distract Israel from Gaza and tie down forces in the north. When the Gaza operation is concluded, Israel may be able to completely focus on the north. Hezbollah may negotiate a ceasefire at this point, If not, Israel may launch its own ground operation in southern Lebanon to destroy Hezbollah. This is far riskier than Gaza. Hezbollah are far stronger and hold a far more advantageous military position to Hamas. Hezbollah can be supplied directly via Syria, another foe to Israel, and in turn Iran. An Israeli incursion into Lebanese territory will no doubt lead to outrage within Lebanon and would likely bring the Lebanese army into conflict. This will also cause serious global outrage too, and may trigger a much wider conflict around Israel. Israel aren't invincible and may begin to exhaust themselves in such an operation. This is without mentioning the other problems in the north they have to worry about. Syria has been through hell since the civil war began in 2011. The Assad regime, backed by Russia and Iran, has more or less emerged the victor. However, the war is yet to conclude, with remaining Syrian rebels backed by Turkey and the US in the north, Kurdish separatists in the east, and ISIS in the desert. When the war broke out, the Syrian rebels were also backed by many other Arab states, who have since abandoned the cause. In 2023, Syria was accepted back into the Arab League, a historical success for the Assad regime. This event is significant and highlights the limits of US influence in the region. Over the last 10 years, the rich Arab states such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE have increasingly gone their own way, making increasingly independent decisions. They begin to make moves for their own benefit rather than relying on the US. It certainly does not mean they are now allied with Tehran, Moscow or Syria, but they are now more open to seeking neutrality with such regimes. More on this later. One can observe that momentum is with Assad, but the conflict is far from over, with many challenges yet to overcome. The main ongoing battle is for the city of Idlib, the last major stronghold of the rebels, supported by Turkey. Artillery battles are non-stop in this area, but a ground incursion remains risky, as Turkish forces are highly present in the region. Furthermore, Russian aid, the main game changer in the war, is likely to be less readily available due to Ukraine. Therefore, one shouldn't expect a land incursion into Idlib for some time yet. Kurdish separatists still control a third of the country in the east. The Kurds are supported by the US, who made great use of the many gas fields in the area. At this time, the main antagonists of the Kurds are the Turks. However, the Syrians aren't too happy about the situation regarding oil reserves either. While the US is still present in the region, a ground operation against the Kurds remains unlikely. So, much of the fate of Syria relies on the US. With everything going on elsewhere, and the gradual independence of emerging economies from US influence, we can expect US influence in Syria and the Middle East as a whole to wane. With conflicts in Ukraine and Israel, it is more likely than ever that the US will pull out from Syria, and even Iraq, as we shall discuss in the next chapter. This would create chaos for the Kurds, and may encourage the Syrians and Turks to launch major offensives towards the east. This may even happen this year, with increasing talks of a US pullout. This could get very ugly, as unlike Afghanistan, where the Taliban just took over, Turks and the Syrian army may fight hard for control of the region. This, along with Turkish-backed rebels in Idlib, could be the next big challenge for Assad. Assad will also be continually backed by Iran and Russia, but both of these nations are involved elsewhere too, as we know. If this situation escalates greatly, the Turks could be turned away from good relations with these eastern powers completely. Whoever is victorious could take control of large portions of territory, most notably the oil fields in the southeast. Next is to again mention Israel. Israel still occupies a part of Syria, the Golan Heights. As anyone could predict, the Assad regime fights against Israel as Iranian allies. Upon escalation in Gaza, the Syrian army began systematic airstrikes against US assets in northern Israel to complement the actions of Hamas and Hezbollah. In turn, Israel strikes at the south of Syria. Like the Hezbollah situation, what happens here is highly unpredictable. If the Israelis conclude the operation in Gaza, will other Iranian allies seek a ceasefire or continue military action? If the latter, which is the likely outcome considering what we discussed in the previous chapters, Israel may also consider military operations beyond the border of Syria. In fact, if Israel launches an operation into Lebanon, the reverse may happen, with Syria possibly launching an incursion into Golan Heights. Lastly is ISIS, the biggest wildcard of all. Though mostly defeated, if a chaotic US withdrawal is on the cards, they could get their hands on American weapons and cause chaos to everyone in the region. To summarise, 2024 could be the most testing year for the Assad regime since the start of the civil war, with the highest possibility for chaos in the eastern Kurdish regions and the south of Israel. This brings us to Iraq. Iraq is another essential ally for Iran, as it and Syria are the land corridor to Lebanon. Like Syria, it has American military bases all over its territory. Upon the ignition of the war in Gaza, the Islamic Resistance of Iraq, a pro-Iranian militia, initiated military operations against US assets on its territory and beyond, to break the US foothold on the region. The goal is simple: make it more challenging for the US to remain in Iraq, encouraging them to completely withdraw. This will allow for more stable land connections from Iran to Lebanon. Like Syria, it is highly possible that the US choose to withdraw from parts of Iraq in the future. A partial withdrawal is more likely than a full withdrawal, perhaps remaining present in the Kurdish regions in the north. The Kurdish regions here are also in conflict with the Turks. If the US pulled out from the Kurdish regions, this could again lead to conflict between Iraq and the Turks, pushing the Turks away from Iran. Like Syria, there is also a threat from the Islamic State here, who in the circumstance of a chaotic US withdrawal, will take advantage and create a major headache for everyone. In 2024, expect the possibility of a partial US withdrawal from Iraq, which will create chaos in the region. Jordan is another important state to watch this year. It, like the rich Arab states south to it, increasingly goes its own way as a state. Keeping the nation stable may be a tricky task this year. Already in 2024, the Islamic resistance in Iraq struck a US military asset in Jordan, a bold move and major turning points. Jordan takes a neutral approach to Gaza and Israel, which is politically risky considering its historical ties to the West Bank region of Israel. If Israel are increasingly aggressive, and the Islamic resistance continue attacks on US assets in Jordan, there is a serious risk of bringing Jordan into conflicts. This may force Jordan to move away from neutrality. If they declare a strong alliance with the US, expect major internal instability, as such a move would be highly unpopular within the populace. Alternatively, the government may push the US to leave the country, which would again be a major blow for the US in the region. In 2024, such drastic decisions are unlikely, but in the future, especially if the US pulls out from Syria and Iraq, the Islamic resistance may heavily pressure the US assets in Jordan too. Saudi Arabia and the other rich Arab states are in a transitional period as they become highly developed nations. They aim to move away from dependence on others. They seek their own global path. Previously, the likes of Saudi particularly have been considered antagonists to Iran. However, it is important to remember that this is exacerbated by US influence in the region, which is now under pressure. As these countries develop, they increasingly seek their own global position. To be clear, this does not mean alliance with Iran or Russia, but the possibility of neutrality is no doubt increased. This is dangerous for the US, as much of its ability to oppose regimes such as Assad's depends on support from the Arabs. In 2023, the UAE also joined BRICS, alongside Iran. It is likely that in the near future, more states, such as the Saudis, could follow too. These states are also certainly neutral towards Russia and China. All this, coupled with Israeli aggression towards Palestinians, could even turn these states completely away from the US and Israel. In 2024, watch the moves of these countries closely. On the whole, expect increasingly neutral decisions from this part of the world. There is one key roadblock that remains between the Arab states and Iran, however. Yemen, in my opinion, is the sleeping giant of the Middle East, with a population of 32 million and major oil reserves. All its neighbours are rich, safe, developed nations, while Yemen remains one of the poorest in the world, in the midst of a brutal civil war. Since 2014, Shia and Sunni militias have been in active conflict across the country. The Shia militia, Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, control the capital Sana'a and most of the western coast, adjacent to the Bab al-Mandab Strait. Meanwhile, Sunni militias, supported by the Saudis and several other Arab Sunni states, as well as the West, control the eastern parts of the country. Ansar Allah have no official allies, but are heavily linked to Iran. This is an extremely powerful position for Iran and other anti-Western powers. The Sunnis have been unable to stop the Houthis, who go from strength to strength. Their geographic leverage, combined with Iranian support, makes the Houthis a major threat to the Arabs and the West. When the conflict in Israel started, they inevitably declared support for Gaza and opposed Israel. Houthis then initiated a highly ambitious military operation on its coastline. They used the opportunity to target Western ships, both military and commercial, undertaking the maritime trade route via the Red Sea. One cannot stress enough the importance of this trade route, which is the main maritime route from Europe to Asia. The Western nations have inevitably struck back with massive firepower, but how effective this has been is difficult to tell. The Houthis have massive leverage here, and can really hurt the West this way. With Iranian weapons and plenty of places to hide on the massive territory controlled by the Houthis, the militia is no joke for the West. As we discussed with Hezbollah and the Islamic resistance in Syria and Iraq, the future of this conflict is unpredictable. There may be a compromise and ceasefire, but if not, expect major escalation here. The ideal scenario for the West is a strong Saudi position against the Houthis, who could launch another ground offensive towards Sana'a. The Houthis have successfully defended against a similar operation in the past. With a stronger Western intervention, such an operation may be more successful. Still, the West has a lot on its plate already. To summarise, in 2024, the outcome in Yemen is also hard to predict, and primarily depends on what happens in Israel. If the attacks continue, the West will be forced to undertake a more serious military campaign into Yemen sooner or later, or lose safe access to its essential maritime trade route. In 2024, Iran will once again have to balance an ambitious foreign policy and an unstable internal situation. The situation looks favourable in the likes of Syria, Iraq and Yemen, but internally, further anti-regime protests are inevitable, as seen in 2022. Furthermore are the challenges on their eastern borders. The Taliban in Afghanistan are loose cannons and may take actions on the border, while Baloch separatists in the southeast cause a headache for Iran and neighbouring Pakistan. The Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict may also cause unrest within the large Azeri population in Iran, as well as issues with the Kurdish minority regarding Kurdish resistance elsewhere. 2024 will be another chaotic year for the regime. The final nation we need to discuss in this video is Turkey. Turkey is well known for pursuing their own geopolitical policy, and consistently balances alliance with Western and Eastern powers. Turkey is a major wildcard in the 21st century. With a unique geopolitical position between Europe and the Middle East, it holds massive leverage over its surroundings. Like Iran, this country is surrounded by instability, which creates opportunity, but also chaos. Turkey also has a demographic issue. Kurdish separatists are a major challenge for Turkey, and already take up around 15 to 20% of the country's population. Turkey is in active dispute with Kurdish militants in Syria and Iraq, conducting regular airstrikes and controlling a buffer zone within Syria. As discussed already, it appears the US may soon leave the Kurdish regions in Syria and Iraq. In a worst-case scenario, the Kurds could be completely abandoned, as was the Afghan government in 2021. Syrians, Iraqis and Turks could also have been quickly and capture parts of the region. This could get messy, as with no US in the region, there's little to stop Turkey seizing some of the oil fields located within Syrian or Iraqi borders. With Russia and Iran standing with Syria and Iraq, the outcome is unpredictable. To the east is the Caucasus, which we'll discuss in a previous video. The situation with Armenia will be another distraction for the Turks, who will support the Azeris at all costs. If the Azeris are continually aggressive towards Armenia and begin a military operation, the Turks will support them. If Armenia is supported by NATO countries, it may cause Turkey to distance itself from NATO or even leave it. The future actions of Turkey are also dependent on their leadership. In 2023, Kılıçdaroğlu, a highly pro-Western politician, was defeated by Erdogan. In the near future, the former may take charge and drive Turkey towards the West again. Nevertheless, a lot could happen in the coming years, and with Erdogan in power, Turkey remains highly assertive on the world stage. In 2024, Turkey will continue to play a careful balancing act between East and West. The Caucasus issue has the potential to push the Turks away from the West, while the Kurdish issue could lead to a major conflict with Iranian and Russian interests. Turkey will reach some compromise on each, the most likely being strongly siding with Azerbaijan in the Caucasus, and truce with Syria and Iraq. Improving ties with the East rather than NATO is more probable with Erdogan in charge. If NATO becomes harsh on Turkey in regards to Caucasus, they may even leave it. To summarise, expect a conclusive military victory for Israel and Gaza, which will be demilitarised. Expect a harsh response from Israel towards Lebanon and Syria, possibly even a ground offensive. Expect a possible US pullouts from either Syria or Iraq, which will cause further chaos in these countries, particularly the Kurdish regions. Expect rich Arab states to increasingly go their own way, likely towards neutrality with the US and Iran. Expect the Houthis to create a major crisis for the West, which may result in a military operation into Western Yemen, or a complete defeat of Western forces in the Red Sea. Thank you for watching. As always, your feedback is greatly appreciated. If there is anything you think I missed out, or you have a strong disagreement with anything I've said, let me know in the comment section below. This will be my last video in this format for now. As for 2024, I believe the Middle East and Europe are the two most important regions to watch. For other ongoing conflicts around the world, I'll make separate videos where I'll go into more detail and include historical context.